this business of writing is not an easy one. It's really important that we all recognize that writing is a business that doesn't come easily to many people, myself included. Although I've written many hundreds of thousands of words, I still find it very difficult. I still take inspiration from writers. I still try to improve, and I have an awful lot of people that help me with editing and ensuring that I communicate as clearly as I possibly can to get my message across. And so what I'm going to talk about over the next, as I say, 20 minutes or so, is just one source of advice. There are plenty of other sources. And you'll see from this slide that, in fact, one of the leadership insights that we've published very recently by Major Dunlop is about leadership through the written word. And there's plenty of very good advice and thinking in that insight. You can find manuals online through Amazon that are published, through social media. Have a look through them. Find your own way through to becoming a better writer. But if I could just start with two pieces of advice. The first is to read, is to think about what makes good communication what it is. Take inspiration from others. Don't copy necessarily, but think about how other people have gone about that business of writing. And the second one is to write yourself, to do lots of writing. No one would expect anyone to buy a pair of trainers, put them on and go and run a marathon without actually doing the hard miles first. You need to prepare yourself mentally and physically, if you like, in terms of skill sets for the task of writing. And I think there's nothing better than having a short piece of work to develop within. And that's really what I want to talk about today. First of all, what an insight is, and I suppose also what it's not. How to think about the idea that is central to your insight. How to structure your piece of writing. The importance of an argument. A few ideas about style and writing, and then we can move on to questions. So as I say, this is quite wave top. Everyone will go about this in a different way. This is just my way of going about it, and hopefully it will create a little bit of discussion, and hopefully we'll see some insights from you. And I should say at the end of the session, Dr. Linda Risso, the editor of the Cal Insights, will be joining us for a few minutes just to tell us about the submission process. So first of all, what is an insight? Let me tell you a little bit about where insights came from to start with, because I think that will give you a good idea about what we're looking for. The Cal Insights began back in 2017 when we felt that it was really important that the Cal created a discussion about leadership within the Army. And the easiest way of doing that, at least initially, was to ask people to submit their ideas on paper, keeping it short, pithy, concise, but giving individuals the opportunity to say something about leadership that others might gain benefit from. I wrote the first one. I actually wrote it on a plane coming back from the United States. I'd met quite an inspirational character who gave me the idea for a theme that I would write about: intelligent disobedience. Ira Chalef, who actually gave a talk at the Cal Leadership Conference last November. And it was over the flight that I began to write down a few words, and it became the first insight: the intelligent, the disobedient soldier. Now we've had about 50 insights published since then, and we are deliberately rank agnostic. And more than that, we have cross-sector thinkers, academics and other practitioners also contributing to our insights, because we don't just see, obviously, leadership being an army business. It is a cross-sector business. It is all of our business, and therefore we want to, if you like, gain richness from all ranks and all sectors of society. And we're keen to hear all voices, and not all voices might agree with the way in which the Army goes about the business of leading and leadership development. But of course, individuals are also giving their own experiences and impressions from their own careers and thoughts on the subject, and they're all very valuable. And we're really keen to support aspiring authors, and doubtless some of you are out there now listening to me because you want to write something down, because you've got something to say, and that's just a great place to start. We can talk about content in a moment, the big idea. Just to remind you, however, and I think this is really an important place for all writers to start, is to think about your audience, which is of course the British Army, but also those that are interested in British Army thinking overseas, and also all of those folk in the UK and around the world that look to the Centre for Army Leadership as a source of inspiration and information. So you've got quite a broad audience to think about. But of course, not every insight has to be directed towards a very broad audience. You might want to talk about a specific subject that actually tackles an issue that is really relevant to part of that audience. And we have plenty of junior NCOs, for example, giving the benefit of their experience in an insight that is perhaps most relevant to their peers, not wholly, but perhaps most relevant. So do think about your audience very carefully. And also don't think about writing something that is going to look like a book when in fact you've only got around about 1,000 words to play with. Now, 1,000 words to those that perhaps don't write much might sound a huge challenge, but most people actually find that they could probably fill a Cal Leadership Insight with 2, 3, 4, 5,000 words. But we keep it to a short word count so that ideas are distilled, that it's a quick read and is something that people don't have to labour over. And I see an insight being in 3 main parts. The article, which is the main content, but also then we have the questions, 3 to 6 questions that follow the insight that are there to stimulate discussion, to stimulate further thinking. And then also I think, and critically, and the feedback we get is that this is a really important part of the insight. It's the further resources, where you can go for more articles, for podcasts, for lectures, for videos, or whatever it might be. And it's the author's responsibility to provide that material. So now let's move on to the idea. Now, once you've got your audience in mind, and once you've recognized that you've got 1,000, 1,300 words to play with, you really need to think carefully about your idea, the main thrust of the content that you're going to deliver. So where do you start with that? Well, I would suggest that with many of you serving in the Army or maybe in the civil service, I know we've got some civil servants listening in as well, is there an experience that you have had, a thought that you'd like to share? Can you build an insight around that? Is there something valuable that you can pass on? Which links to that specific issue. It might not be an experience that you've had. It might be an experience, a thought, an idea that somebody else has had. But what is your reaction to it? A good example of that might be followership. Might not be an original idea from one of our authors, but certainly individuals have a response to it that might be valuable in developing a discussion around that subject. Occasionally we do get that novel idea, that new thought, that idea that perhaps we're doing things the wrong way, We could go about it in a different way, that you're synthesizing, you're bringing together the ideas of others to create a new novel idea that you'd like to share. So ask yourself questions in the first instance. What is it that you're trying to say and why? Then ask yourself, how can I make this idea relevant to the audience? Does the idea fit 1,000 words, or is it actually more relevant to a book, or indeed even a lifetime's work? So the idea has got to fit the audience and also the word limit. Then you've got to ask yourself, where am I going to get my information from? Is it going to be through library books, the internet, chatting with friends, conferences, interviews? Where's your knowledge, your evidence, your information going to come from? Because if you're going to make an argument stick, if people are going to sit up and listen, your argument has got to be not only informative, but it's got to be substantiated with evidence. All the time I'm asking myself, do I have something useful to say? Is my audience going to be interested? And if so, what might they be most interested in? And equally importantly, what might they not be interested in? You can try various ideas out, perhaps on family, friends, and colleagues before you even put pen to paper. Just test your idea before you even start to write. Then ask yourself about that knowledge or experience. Can you place that at the heart of what you want to write? I'm very keen that people think about, when they're writing, how they add colour, how they add evidence. You do bring the piece to life with your own experience or with the experience of others if you can. People are interested in people and their experiences. So if you can, make it people-centric. And then finally, what conclusions can I usefully draw? We don't really want a piece that comes to no conclusions, something that meanders around and doesn't really come to any sort of useful recommendations or doesn't draw threads together. We want something that we can tie off at the end. So there is a beginning, a middle, and an end to an insight, and all within 1,000 to 1,300 words. And because you're thinking of all of that, and because you've got a limited word count, and because writing is difficult, this is the challenge. Insights are not easy things to write. They don't write themselves. And that's why often, and we'll come to this a little bit later, you'll need to draft and redraft and refine and get it to something that is not only credible and readable, but also interesting. So practice is the key to all of this, I think. So moving on to the next slide. I call this the clues in the title. Just have a look at the first 12 insights when thinking about the idea and the content. And look at what is highlighted here, because they give a really good clue as to what the insight is about. It's the headline, be it serve to lead, or creative conflict, or the experience of others. And you can also see the diversity of the themes, the content that are covered in the first 12 insights alone. And as I say, we've published nearly 50 by this point in 2024. So we don't say that really anything is off limits. Just make it an interesting, viable, practical subject, and make sure that your title reflects that. So everyone that picks it up knows immediately what it's about. So I would suggest that you do go through the 50 or so Cal Insights that have been written and have a look what's been done, but also have a look at what's not been done and see if you can fill that gap. So moving on to the structure. Now, the saying there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat is never more relevant than when talking about writing. And so, as I say, this is just my point of view. There is no ideal number of words for an introduction for the main body of the work or the conclusion, but from my experience, you can see from this slide how I would think about dividing up the word limit across the 3 separate sections that most, if not all, insights have. First of all, the introduction. About 175 words, but that might equate to 2 or 3 paragraphs that get us into what the insight is about. So we don't want it to be incredibly dry. We want to try and capture the reader's attention. And as you see from my bullet there, it tees up ideas. It starts to talk about the content and what one might expect to follow. And it might talk about the structure. It might talk about the mix of personal experience and theory or whatever it might be. But that introduction is not just a way of starting an insight. It's an introduction to the content and the way that you are going to approach it. And you can see on the right there is the front cover of the second insight that I wrote in October 2022, titled The Disruptive Leader, Bernard Montgomery as a Company Commander. And the way that I start that, you can see, is by the age of 37, Bernard Montgomery had. So immediately you're into that sort of personal appreciation of somebody else. I've got somebody's age there, I've got their name, and obviously it's a well-known name, and I'm beginning to create a very clear idea of what I'm trying to get after in the insight and the main person that I'm going to be interrogating ideas through, Bernard Montgomery in this case. The main body of the work, around about 800 words. So this is clearly the bulk of your word limit. And again, think about dividing it up into paragraphs. What we want is a series of paragraphs that drive the thinking forward, and maybe the story if there is one to tell. And it's in the main body that we see the development not only of an interesting story and interesting ideas, but also of a persuasive argument, because basically that's what insights are about. They're about not only informing, but putting forward an argument that individuals can agree with or indeed disagree with. The point is that it creates a discussion around that subject, and that main body is the area for that main argument or that main event. Don't leave it to the last part, the conclusion, about 175 words, so I suppose roughly the same sort of length as the introduction, which is about clarifying, about emphasizing points, is perhaps bringing relevance to your audience of a subject that, like Bernard Montgomery in the 1930s and 1940s might seem to be anachronistic, not relevant to today. But why is it relevant to today? Well, I'll read the conclusion to my insight, and hopefully I'll persuade you that Montgomery's experiences and work during the 1930s is relevant to us today. And then you've got the questions and the resources, which are, if you like, a bit below the actual insight proper itself. It finishes it off about 150 words again. As I say, have a look at other insights and how they're done and see what you can draw from the writing of others. So the structure, I've already mentioned my introduction, how and why I've started it in the way that I have. Again, it reflects perhaps my interest rather than the interests of my readers. I really don't know, but it sort of seems to work. I always try to start with what I call always my first heading on my sheet of paper. It's called the opening gambit. What is it that's going to draw the reader's attention whilst also being relevant? And if you look at that first paragraph, you've got some key words and phrases there, not only the age and the name of Bernard Montgomery, but some words that are designed to pique interest, professional admiration rather than personal appreciation, turbulence, for example. what we've got there is, I hope I've enticed you to read on. What is it about this person and the way you went about business that the author is going to tell me more about? If you can achieve that, then I think you've got half a chance of the individual at least finishing the first page. But try and keep that momentum going. Tell the individuals what the insight is about and why. Introduce people, places, and ideas, and provide the context. What my insight goes on to do is to talk about the context of all of this within the interwar period. And obviously we know that Bernard Montgomery became a field marshal in the war that was eventually to befall the world in 1939, and Montgomery was going to play a key part in that. So I'm beginning to tease out those ideas of a relatively junior officer in the 1930s being developed in a certain way, and he was going to have
sound about as destitute as Falcons do this season.
Important part in the Second World War. The main body, as I mentioned previously, made up of paragraphs, not one or two very long paragraphs, but several shorter paragraphs. Maybe mine are a little too long for your liking. Who knows? But that's the way that I write. But my paragraphs, I hope, contain an idea that I follow through and provide evidence for. So each paragraph is in itself like a mini essay. You know, take a paragraph out and hopefully it will have a point that you can take away. So make a firm point, provide evidence for points, and as I say there in my final bullet, include quotes, include words that people have said or have written. Create colour wherever you can. And again, that makes for a better reader experience, a better writing experience, if I'm perfectly honest. I enjoy learning about people using their words and using their words as evidence for the points that I'm trying to make in my writing. The argument. I would say that the argument is often something that is forgotten by many new writers. Often they just want to tell a story, and often the story is interesting, but it's probably not enough. Try to create an argument, a persuasive argument. My argument for this insight about Montgomery is that Montgomery had certain leadership styles that created turbulence, that created change, that weren't always liked by his followers or indeed by his commanding officers and seniors, but actually created good and greater effectiveness in those that he himself was training and commanding. An interesting story, but my argument is, do we do that enough? Do we challenge enough? Or do we fall into line? Do we think enough about doing things in a different way? What can we learn from people like Montgomery? And what shouldn't we try to learn? And that's really what my argument is about, is trying to make Montgomery's story relevant for the modern day. As I say, each paragraph contributes to that. Every paragraph is linked. I don't just sort of change gears in a clunky fashion. I try to ease from one paragraph to the next. So as you can see here, by the second paragraph at the end of that page that's underlined, I go from a period in the early summer to late summer. So by August, the chronology is carrying on. There's not a big clunk there. It's an easing into the next paragraph and the next point. And critically, don't obscure with detail. This insight could have been a book almost in and of itself. could have given you huge amounts of detail about Montgomery's methods, where he went, who's inspired by, who liked him, who didn't like him. Just not relevant to this particular insight with so few words. So I kept it as light as I possibly could, while still hopefully being persuasive and interesting. Finally, the conclusion. I don't think that in a very short piece of work like an insight, there is any need for a summary of the argument. You know, often at the end of a long essay of say 10, 12,000 words, you'll remind the reader what they have just read. Well, I don't think we particularly need that in something so short. It's only a few pages long. So what I would suggest that you do in a short piece is actually just pull together the strands of your argument. Distill your argument, maybe. Place an emphasis upon some key events, a key moment, a key point that you've made. Maybe try to re-emphasize that, develop it even a little bit more. Draw attention to the issues that you think are really pertinent, and maybe make it relevant to the modern day. I call that sort of food for thought, and I don't think there's anything wrong with leaving an insight with some food for thought, just teeing up those questions that follow immediately afterwards. So coming towards the end now of my part of the presentation, but I do want to say something about style and writing, and I'll come back to that point. You know, don't think you can just pick up your pen or open your laptop and just start writing in something that's going to be publishable. Some people can, and some people will have great experience in writing, and that's absolutely fine. But most of us, myself included, you know, will need to think very carefully about what they want to do. Not just going to sit down and start writing. You know, I plan, and I plan again. I stress test it. I then try to think about a structure and the word limit. I put numbers of words next to each part of my plan. I try and think about my voice as well, and I would encourage you to do so. Don't copy the voice of other people. Try and find your own voice. Now that will come more with your own written style, but you know, be confident. We in the COW and the Insight team want to hear your voice. Simple as that. I think about how to hold the reader's attention. I think about the colour. I think about the incidentals and the quotes and the words that I use that might give an insight into someone's personality, or might add colour to something I'm trying to discuss, particularly if it's quite dry, a theory or a set of circumstances. A little bit of colour brings it to life. I try to be thought-provoking and persuasive all the way through. I hope I do that with the subjects that I choose, but I also try to do that with the points that I make. Communicate clearly. It's the most painful part, I think, of writing, communicating clearly, trying to put words in an order that not only informs, but is also communicating an idea clearly. And hopefully someone will enjoy the way in which you have written those words. And that, again, isn't going to be done on first draft, second draft, or probably third draft. I don't know how many drafts I go through of my writing. I really do just don't count any longer. It takes as long as it takes. And I'll often read out my work aloud or get my wife to read out my work. And yeah, poor thing. And you can hear where the grammar doesn't make sense. The point isn't made clearly. There needs to be more punctuation. And it's just a painful process. And I don't know any writers, and I know scores of them, that doesn't go through this same process. Very, very few people write in a first draft that is publishable. I know only one person in my 40 years of writing that could do that, and that person was extraordinary. It's not something I can do. Find your own way, but don't be afraid of redrafting. As I say, show your work to friends for constructive criticism. Adjust, rewrite, do it again and again and again until it's done. And eventually you'll have had enough and you just need to let it go. So when I say let it go, that means handing over to the CAL team for some editorial advice and perhaps some reshaping. So Linda, are you there? Can you come in at this point?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you. Thanks.
So I'm the editor of the CAL Insights, and I'm here to take over once you have gone through the process Lloyd has so eloquently described. So I'm really flexible in the sense that I adapt my role according to each and single author. Some of you come to me with a well-polished draft, and then it's just a matter of editing and polishing up. Some of you come to me with some rough ideas, and then we talk through them together. We define the overarching theme and the audience, and then we work from there. So I'm more than happy always to meet with you online and to discuss your ideas prior to putting pen to paper. So it really depends what kind of author you are, how experienced you are, how much help you want to receive. And so the point of this last slide is really to go through the actual process for those of you who have not been through it before. So as I said, the process starts when you contact me in the form that you wish to contact me with. So it could be a polished draft, or it could be just some bullet points and some ideas. What we do is that we work together, repolishing the draft up to the point in which I feel that we have a solid idea that can go forward. And I send this draft to the CAL core team. They have usually 1 to 2 weeks to read and comment, and they may get back to us with some substantial revisions or some minor changes. Depending from what we have, we work again on it, and this may take as little as a couple of days or sometimes up to a few weeks. And again, when we are happy with it, I checked over it, I prepare it for publication, and the finished insight goes to the CAL team to be uploaded onto the website. We also print some copies, and which we keep in our office, and which we bring to various events, and we circulate during our own events. The issue is that very often the question that I receive is, how long does this whole process take? There is no really a fixed term for this. It really depends on the quality of the writing, the theme, and the response both of the authors to my comments and of the CAL core team. You need to understand that sometimes the CAL core team is under a lot of pressure with competing tasks, and therefore revising and reviewing the CAL insights is not a priority, so this may take a little bit longer. I've now edited, I think, 25 insights and brought them to publication. And the quickest turnaround has been a week from beginning to end. The longest one has been 7 months. So, and there is anything in between. It really depends on the single piece and on the kind of response from the author working on it and on the CAL team. Final thing to remember is that even if you work with me and I polish it up and send it onto the CAL team for review, they may say they don't think that the topic is appropriate or is not the right time to publish something like that at the moment, or may feel that they are not interested in it. So even if we have spent perhaps a few weeks working on it, this does not mean that the CAL insights will go into publication. Said that, this is more of a caveat because it has not happened so far at all, because I have a good sense of what goes and what doesn't go through with the CAL, and therefore if you approach me with a provisional idea of something that I know will not be viable in the long run, I already try to redirect you to something that is more viable and possibly successful for us. So don't worry about it. We will always work together. In terms of my role is both in terms of helping you shaping the initial topic, but also preparing it for publication towards the end. And so I do all the editing and all the footnotes and the bibliography. So you don't have to be worried about the standard for that. I will make sure that everything is it's ready for publication. So I now leave the floor open to questions for me or Lloyd, in case you have anything you want to explore further.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Linda. And just whilst the questions come in,